There is a rule on the Appalachian Trail that nobody puts in the guidebooks because the people who follow it don't think it needs explaining. Every veteran thru-hiker on this trail will tell you the same thing without being asked. 9 o'clock is not evening in these mountains. 9 o'clock is hiker midnight. You stop. You make no noise. You close your eyes. In August of 2024, deep in the backcountry of the Great Smoky Mountains, within 2 miles of Clingman's Dome, the highest point on the entire Appalachian Trail, a solo hiker named Jonathan Reece decided that rule was for other people. By 2:17 a.m., he was pinned on a granite outcrop in the dark, headlamp dying, something circling below him that moved on 2 legs at a speed no animal in the Appalachian Mountains should be capable of. The Great Smoky Mountains National Park rangers filed their report the next morning. 3 hours of documentation. The incident file exists. It is not indexed in the park's public database. What you are about to hear is the account. His name is Jonathan Reece, and this happened to him in the Appalachian Mountains in August of 2024. This happened on a Saturday the 17th and up until 8:47 that night. Nothing about it was unusual at all. Jonathan was 34, an IT project manager out of Knoxville, forklift certified back before the desk job. He ran a trail vlog with 31 subscribers, chasing a shot he didn't have yet. Clingman's Dome at sunrise above the cloud line. He'd hiked this stretch of the AT 3 times before, 47 miles logged. His headlamp, a black Diamond Spot 400, was running fresh batteries. His backup battery bank wasn't. He'd burned it dry that afternoon, charging his GoPro, and he hadn't noticed. Inside the cover of his red moleskin trail journal, in permanent marker, was his wife Dana's cell number, written on his first section hike, never thought about since. 2 miles southwest of the dome, in a tunnel of rhododendron thick enough to blot out the sky, Jonathan stopped at a trail register. A plastic tube bolted to a post, a spiral notebook inside. He unscrewed the cap over a handful of trail mix. The last entry was dated 3 days back. Tight, slanted handwriting. Made it to the gap, heard the whistling, kept moving. Don't stop for it. Signed R. Mays. He laughed, snapped a photo, typed a caption about wind through the rock formations. A fold ran across the page, cutting through the entry, and tucked under that crease sat a second line he never saw. His father had spent 18 years as a backcountry ranger in these mountains, and he used to say the same thing every time Jonathan brought up a trip out here. 9 o'clock in these mountains isn't bedtime, son. It's something older than us taking the trail back. Jonathan had never written that one down. His headlamp showed 1 bar left. At full brightness, the only setting worth anything here, that gave him maybe 90 minutes. Shelter sat 1.1 miles off. In the dark, with a full pack, that meant 45. 9:04 p.m. Shelter was closer than the parking lot. The math was simple. He'd done harder pushes than this. So he kept walking, and somewhere between one step and the next, the mountain went silent. Not quiet, silent. 6 hours inside a wall of August sound, cicadas and tree frogs and the steady creak of the canopy, and he hadn't noticed it until it was gone. It dropped out the way a refrigerator hum drops out when the power cuts. All at once. His boot hit gravel. The echo came back wrong, too fast, too close, like the walls of the tunnel had leaned in 10 feet while he wasn't looking. He kept walking. He moved at shelter pace, the ground-eating shuffle of a tired hiker who had already committed, when 0.7 miles out, the whistling started. 3 short notes. A pause. 3 short notes. The same interval, over and over, the cadence of a kid working through a scale on a recorder. But the tone was wrong in a way that took him 3 repeats to place. Wet, hollow, like a pipe made out of something that used to hold fluid. It came from his left, then his right. Then it came from directly behind him and directly ahead, at the exact same time. They kept pace. When he stopped, they stopped. When he slowed, the intervals stretched to match him. He'd check the GoPro footage later, lights on, couch. The audio would be clean trail silence, no whistling at all, but his breath was misting in his headlamp beam. In 78-degree August heat, at 5,800 feet, that wasn't supposed to happen. The temperature in this hollow had dropped 20 degrees in under 90 seconds. The smell arrived a full 30 seconds before his headlamp found the source. Iron and something underneath it. Wet animal, thick enough to taste at the back of his throat. The specific smell of a kennel drain crossed with a butcher's table. His headlamp found it. A 65-liter pack sat dead center in the trail. Forest green, serious gear, the kind a thru-hiker saves up 6 months for. It hadn't fallen off a frame. It hadn't been dropped. The main compartment was torn open from the back panel in 4 parallel lines running clean through the frame sheet. Not a rip, a shredding, the kind of damage a claw makes when it isn't in a hurry. The hip belt was snapped. The shoulder strap webbing had been pulled out of its mounts the way you'd pull a loose thread, twisted, not cut. Caught in the metal zipper pulls were long strands of coarse gray hair. Jonathan had seen bear damage before, plenty of it. Bears rake downward, tear at the top where the food smell is. They don't pull straight through a frame sheet like that, and they don't leave hair that's thin as fishing line but twice as coarse, pressed into the zipper teeth, the way it only gets pressed when something pushes its face hard against fabric and holds it there. His hands were steady when he photographed it. He'd understand later that steady hands didn't mean he wasn't afraid. The part of his brain that controlled his fingers just hadn't caught up yet to the part of his body that already knew, because the hair on both his forearms was standing straight up and had been for a while. He stepped around the pack. He didn't stop. He didn't turn back. Into the GoPro, out loud, he reasoned it through. Shelter was closer than the parking lot. There'd be other hikers there. Moving forward was just the smarter play. He said some version of that 3 separate times, like he was trying to convince the camera, or maybe just himself. He didn't think about R. Mays. He didn't look down at the name tag hanging off the shredded hip belt, because it had landed face down in the gravel, and some part of him already understood the name on the other side wasn't something he wanted in his head tonight. The whistling followed him past the pack. 3 notes, a pause. 3 notes. Closer now, or maybe just louder, because the silence underneath it had gotten so complete that even a small sound carried the length of the hollow. He checked his watch without meaning to. 9:19 p.m. He'd lost 15 minutes somewhere between the register and the pack, and he couldn't account for where they'd gone. His headlamp swept the trail ahead, and for just a second, at the edge of the light, something that had been standing among the rhododendron leaves was not standing there anymore. He told himself it was a deer. He kept walking faster now, and underneath his own footsteps he started to hear something else keeping time with him. Not the whistling. Something slower, something with weight behind it. He moved faster, shoulder blades tight, pack riding high, and the rhododendron tunnel had changed. The branches hung lower, or the trail had narrowed. He had to duck in 2 spots where he'd walked upright 20 minutes earlier. Wet leaves dragged across the back of his neck and slid down inside his collar. Every branch he pushed aside snapped back, with a rhythm that sounded almost like it was answering something. Then the tunnel ended. The trail broke into an open, rocky stretch, 40 yards of bare ground between two walls of rhododendron, the August sky visible for the first time in an hour. Stars ran edge to edge. Fog pooled at knee height in the low center of the clearing, thick and still as something holding its breath. He stood there a second, grateful for the open air. 50 yards ahead, something crossed the trail. Not walked. Moved. The way water moves when it's poured, no joints to it. Covering the full width of the clearing on all fours in under 2 seconds. Pale the way a fish belly is pale, not a color so much as an absence of one. The limbs reached too far past where limbs should reach. Ribs pressed against skin from the inside. Then it was gone into the brush, and the clearing was empty again. Jonathan stood there for 3 seconds. He counted later, though he couldn't say why, and then walked forward, because the only other direction was backward, alone, in the dark. A good chunk of people watching this would have turned around the second that thing crossed the trail. He didn't. The breathing started when he was 20 feet into the brush. Not from behind him, from 2 feet to his right, at shoulder height, a wet, rhythmic sound, steady inhale through something narrow. Not labored, curious. The way a large animal breathes when it hasn't decided what it's going to do yet. He didn't look. His father's voice surfaced unprompted, the way old voices do when the body's too busy to filter them out. 9 o'clock in these mountains isn't bedtime, son. He kept his eyes on the next 10 feet of trail, pack frame creaking, his collapsing left heel grinding inside the boot, and the breathing matched him stride for stride. Pacing him, not chasing him. That distinction mattered more than he expected. The fog had followed him into the brush, which wasn't right. Fog forms in open hollows where cold air pools. It doesn't follow a person into dense rhododendron. But it had, thin streamers curling around his ankles, and the trail got harder to follow because of it. Twice his headlamp found a false path through a gap in the leaves, and he had to backtrack to find the white blaze on the bark. Somewhere behind him, the bone whistle started again. 3 notes. A pause. 3 notes. Closer than before. Now there were 2 sources. One behind him, one beside him in the brush. They weren't whistling together. They were taking turns, the way 2 people pass a conversation between them when they already know what the other is going to say. Something was signaling. He understood that much without anyone telling him. His watch read 9:41 p.m. Shelter was 0.4 miles ahead, and his headlamp had dropped to its final bar, taking on that faint amber tint that meant it was already counting down what it had left to give him. The trail tilted upward, loose stone underfoot. Water trickled somewhere off to his left, and beneath that, fainter, almost buried. Something that might have been breathing again, or might have just been the water. He didn't stop to find out which. Ahead, through a gap in the brush, his headlamp caught bare granite rising out of the trail, blocking the way forward. A scramble section, iron rebar set into the rock decades ago, a 4-minute climb in daylight with both hands free. He had neither. 35 pounds on his back, 1 bar of battery, and something keeping perfect pace with him on either side, and the only way through was up. But the trail dead-ended at granite. The breathing in the brush had stopped. The whistling had stopped. No sound at all, not even the water he'd been tracking off to his left a minute ago. That was worse than the sound had ever been. A mountain that had been making 2 distinct whistling sounds 30 seconds earlier didn't just go quiet for no reason. The silence wasn't relief. It was a different category of information entirely. The kind the oldest part of a person's nervous system was built to recognize and has no polite way of explaining afterward. He grabbed the first rebar hold, pulled. His boot found the first notch in the granite, and the pack swung wide on his shoulders, dragging his headlamp arc down across the base of the outcrop as he climbed. It was standing there, looking up at him. 7 feet, maybe more, hard to judge from above, with a face that was human the way a reflection in water is human. Everything technically present, everything wrong. The eye sockets sat an inch deeper than they should have. The jaw hung 2 inches below where a jaw hinges, with no expression on it at all. Not because there was no feeling behind it, but because the muscle that would make an expression simply wasn't arranged to produce one. Its eyes caught his headlamp beam and threw it straight back, flat and yellow, the way a coyote's eyes do, or a deer's, eyes built to gather light instead of make any of their own. It rose, 4 limbs to 2 in one continuous motion, no hesitation in it, no effort, no sound from the joints at all, reaching its full height in under a second. Then, it clicked its teeth together 3 times in the exact rhythm and interval of the whistling that had been following him for the last 40 minutes. Then it moved. The eye couldn't process the middle of it. There was a start position and an end position and nothing legible in between, and its hand closed around his ankle, fingers wrapping the boot, and as he kicked free, its nails dragged across the granite. A dry scrape, a match pulled across the wrong surface, and actual sparks scattered off the rock face in the dark, bright and brief, gone before he understood what he was looking at. He was over the top. On his hands and knees on the flat stone above, pack swinging wild off one shoulder, headlamp beam bouncing crazily across the sky and the trees and back down again. The taste of copper sat at the back of his throat. Cold bled up through the granite into his palms. The smell of wet iron rose from below him, thick enough to feel in his chest. And underneath all of it, nothing. No footsteps retreating through the brush, no branches moving, no breathing. The thing that had been breathing at his shoulder for half a mile had gone completely, perfectly silent. His left hand was pressed flat against the rock, and under his palm he could feel notches, small, deliberate, carved into the granite in parallel rows, too uniform to be erosion, too old to be anything recent. He started counting them without meaning to, fingers moving along each groove, and he wouldn't be able to say later how many there were. He just knew his hand kept moving and his mind kept losing the number somewhere around 15, every single time. His headlamp gave a long flicker and died at 1:48 in the morning. The last bar had carried him further than it should have. He sat there in the absolute dark that comes from being 2,000 feet up a mountain with no moon, no city glow, no light source for 10 miles in any direction. Just him, the cold granite, and whatever was or wasn't still down at the base of the outcrop, waiting to find out if he was coming back down. He didn't move for 4 hours and 11 minutes. He knew that later because he checked his watch the second the sky started to gray, and it had stopped being dark exactly that long. He didn't try to climb down. He sat with his back against the cold stone, eyes open the entire time, counting his own breaths because it was the only sound left that he trusted. Below him, nothing moved. Nothing breathed. The silence held, perfect and complete, the kind of silence that feels less like an absence and more like something choosing to be still. And then, just once right at the edge of what a person can actually hear, more felt than heard, the bone whistle sounded again. 3 notes. A pause. 3 notes. Not from where he'd left it behind in the brush. Not 2 miles off, the way distance should have carried it by then. Maybe 50 yards. 3 hikers bound for Clingman's Dome found Jonathan at 6:03 a.m. They'd later tell rangers he was sitting upright on the granite with his knees pulled to his chest, both hands pressed flat against the rock, staring south down the ridgeline like he was waiting for something to come back into view. He wasn't injured. His water was untouched. He wasn't hypothermic. For a long time, he didn't speak at all. The first thing he said, before his name, before anything about what happened, was that the whistling was still in his head, that he could hear it right then, sitting on that rock with 3 strangers around him and the sun already coming up. He filed his report at the Clingman's Dome Road access point at 7:41 a.m. 3 hours to document everything. He left the ranger station at 10:58 and drove back to Knoxville without stopping for gas, which didn't make sense, because his tank was nearly empty, and Dana had to come pick him up from the side of the highway 40 minutes outside the city. Rangers found the shredded pack 2 days later, exactly where Jonathan had stepped around it without stopping. They turned the name tag over, the one that had landed face down in the gravel, the one he'd never let himself look at. Raymond Mays, it read, Asheville, North Carolina. Raymond Mays had registered for a solo backcountry permit on August 11th and been reported overdue on the 15th, 2 days before Jonathan ever set foot on that section of trail. His tent and personal gear turned up near the route, and the register entry, the one Jonathan had photographed and laughed at, the one with the fold he never bothered to open, had a second line underneath that crease. If you're reading this after dark, stop reading and move. Raymond Mays was found alive 9 days after that, 4 miles off trail in the Nolan Creek drainage, 22 miles from where his pack had been sitting in the trail. Dehydrated, not speaking. He still hasn't talked publicly about any of it. Jonathan's trail vlog has been inactive ever since. His last upload, a 12-minute gear review filmed in his own driveway, has the comments turned off. Dana told a friend once that the red moleskin journal was completely full when he finally came home. Front to back, margin to margin, the same line written over and over on every page. She wouldn't say what the line was. He left for those mountains alone. He came home alone in a different way than he'd left, the kind of alone that has nothing to do with whether anyone else is in the room with you. In the Appalachian Mountains, the rule about 9 o'clock was never really invented by hikers checking their watches. Nobody wrote it down because it didn't need writing down. The people who lived in these mountains before any of us did, they didn't move after dark without fire, without company, without knowing exactly where everyone in their group was standing. They never explained the rule to their kids. The mountain explained it for them. Some things don't need a name to be real. They just need a fire, 4 walls, and the sense to be inside them before 9 o'clock comes and the trail stops being yours. Jonathan Reece knows that now. So does Raymond Mays. The register at the Gap got a new entry 2 days after Jonathan's, dated August 19th. No name attached. Small, careful handwriting. 9 p.m. Stopping here, not pushing to the dome. Something about the quiet tonight. Nobody ever signed it.